My name is Touzeau. I'm from Human Resource Services, and I'm going to be talking for the next 25 or 30 minutes about the MU staff job title and salary study. So let me start off by talking to you about why we would do a study like this in the first place. Why would we take the time to study the compensation and the classification for our administrative services support employees and for all of our staff employees? So it happened with our 2 presidents ago, when President Forsey first came here. He wanted us to pull together some data regarding our largest expense, labor, as you can imagine. That's probably the biggest piece of our budget. And we were able to give him fairly good information about our faculty salaries, also how far from the market we were compared to other, at the time, Big 12 institutions, and also how we compared to the AAU public institutions. And so he asked for the same comparable information regarding our staff salaries. And unfortunately, we were not able to do that. The University of Missouri has not undertaken a comprehensive review of the classification and compensation for staff since 1972. And as a result, what we've done over time is we've added lots of classifications, lots of ranges, and we couldn't really give our executive team a good indication of how we were paying, whether or not we were paying equitably, and kind of the process that we were using to make sure that we were paying competitively according to market. So that's why we decided to do this particular project. It was to really give us the opportunity to take a look at all the staff salaries and to come up with a new salary structure that we hope would make explaining how people get paid in this environment to make a lot more sense. So, what is the study? The study is a review of 2 basic things. The first thing we wanted to do is to take a look at the relative relationship of one job to another in a vertical hierarchy. So is a job more complicated without regard to pay, just in terms of the content of the job itself? That was the first objective. And then once we had accomplished that, our second objective was to then come up with a new salary structure that essentially compensated based on that hierarchy. But we do the job analysis, and I'll talk about how we do that and how we then ultimately use that to determine our salary structure in a moment. Our goal, of course, is to have a compensation system that is equitable both internally and competitively externally. That's our biggest concern, is that we have both internal equity and external competitiveness. Of course, the goal is to retain high-quality talent. So the jobs that we looked at in this particular job family, it's called the Office Administration and Support Job Family, and it's defined as those job titles that perform clerical and administrative duties in support of all kinds of university functions. And I've listed here the other job families that you see here, just because I want you to know that this is not the only job family that we're studying. We will be studying all of the staff jobs by the time this study is completed. The kinds of titles that you would typically find in the office administration and support jobs are these kinds of titles: the executive staff assistant, administrative assistant, the entire office support staff series, the library information assistant, and the administrative associate. These are real typical of the kinds of jobs that we find. And they are located, as you can imagine, in all the schools and colleges across the university. And for this study, 75 titles were reviewed, affecting about 1,500 employees. So this was by far the largest job group of all the job groups that we studied. So what did we do? We evaluated each title, and what's important to remember is that we were evaluating the title. We didn't evaluate your individual job. We did not look at what you are doing individually to see if you were in the right title. We made the assumption that you were in the right title, and based on information we had about these titles, we took a look at the duties that were associated with them. Some titles changed, some titles remained the same, and new salary ranges were developed. What's really important is what we did not do. No employees lost pay as a result of the salary study. We did not change anyone's job duties or functions. It did not relate to organizational structure or layoffs or reorganizations. And an individual employee performance was not considered in the job evaluation for this particular study. This really was looking at the titles themselves, not the individuals, as I mentioned earlier. So I mentioned before it affected 34 divisions and colleges, and we looked at existing job descriptions, title information, and other compensation information. We have a lot of information on this particular job group because we have so much employment activity with the jobs that are in this group. It's important to note that all 4 campuses in the hospital are involved in the same process, and when we finish with the new salary structure and the new ranges, they apply to not only the University of Missouri-Columbia, but all of the other campuses as well. We did most of our data collection in 2012 for this particular job group, but we've been working on the project since fall of 2010. So now I want to talk a little bit about that hierarchy I talked about, doing the job evaluation, and how we did that and what we were doing. So we purchased a system called GGS, Global Grading System, and it's a job evaluation system that is used in a lot of settings, both educational and private sector, both national and international. And it's specifically designed to help us come up with this job hierarchy, as you see here. It allows us to really try to find true distinctions between one job and another. And how do you really determine the difference between one job and the other in this hierarchy? Basically, it's 3 basic principles. It's the knowledge, skills, and abilities that are attached to that particular title. It's the complexity of the work associated with that job, and the scope of the work. Meaning, so complexity is kind of deals with how complex the tasks are and how much authority is with the job, and scope has a lot to do with the breadth of the responsibilities assigned to that title. And we use that criteria for all of the jobs, not only the jobs in the office administration and support job family, but for all the jobs that we evaluated. So now I'm going to take you through the whole process of job evaluation so that you get a chance to see how we actually take a particular title and how we actually evaluate it to come up with its relative relationship in this job hierarchy that I mentioned earlier. So the first thing we have to do is determine what is the career path for a particular job. We take a job and we sort it by path. And then we sort it a second time by the 8 roles that are part of this evaluation process. And then finally, we use 7 criteria to determine within a particular role, and for this job group, it's the office administration and support job role, what it would be the grade. And the grade essentially refers to that hierarchy that we talked about earlier. So let's take a look at how that is done. One of the things we like about using the global grading system, or what we call GGS, as you see indicated in this slide, is that it has 2 paths. There's a management career path, and there's an individual contributor career path. And for higher education particularly, the kinds of complex jobs that we have at the university, we really need to be able to pay, even if we end up paying comparably, but sometimes we pay comparably for a job that does high-level complex duties, but is not necessarily in the management career path. And this particular job evaluation system allows us to assess that so that we can pay appropriately. So this slide just kind of tells you what kinds of things do we look at to determine the level within the individual contributor career path or the supervisor or manager career path. So as an individual contributor, we look at the kind of functional knowledge. And functional knowledge, for purposes of this discussion, really means education or expertise. And then independence in applying that professional expertise determines the person's role or level in this particular job evaluation system. If you are a supervisor or a manager, we look at the type and level of positions that are supervised and the influence of that particular job on the department, on the division, and on the entire organization. We also include the supervision of students. So many people would say that that's the hardest supervision of all. We wanted to be able to consider that as a supervisory aspect of a job when we did the job evaluation. And this particular methodology allows us to do that. So once we've decided on the career path for the job, the next thing we want to do is determine the role of the job. And so what you see here are the various roles as part of this job evaluation system. Most of the jobs that we're talking about here are in the clerical administration job group. Now let's talk about how do you determine within the clerical and administration job group the relative relationship of one job to another, that hierarchy. We use 7 factors, And essentially, this is an automated process where we look at a job, and essentially the software asks us a series of questions about the scope and the range of the activities associated with that title. We answer those questions, and it allows us to come up with a number that we can use to determine that hierarchy. So let me go through these factors with you. As I mentioned earlier, all jobs in the study, my job, your job, and any other job that's in this GGS, are essentially evaluated on the same criteria, which is very different than what we currently have now. We have separate pay scales and schedules for administrative professional, for office technical, for IT, and under this system, we will be using the same criteria for everything. So functional knowledge, as I mentioned earlier, that is essentially the knowledge required to perform the particular work. Expertise would be equivalent to the notion of experience. What experience do you need in order to function in this job? This particular methodology assumes that all jobs have a leadership component, even if it is just helping another employee get oriented on the job, like an on-the-job training type approach. That leadership is an essential function of all kinds of jobs. Problem solving. How independent does the person in this title function in terms of being able to do problem solving independently? Now these two concepts are kind of complicated the way they appear here, but I think the best way to understand them is the nature of impact talks about essentially the breadth of your job. It's kind of a horizontal method. How big is your job? While the area of impact has to do with how much authority is contained in your job. It's a vertical measure. So we're trying to accommodate both the breadth and the scope. And of course, all jobs require some level of interpersonal skills and communication. So these are the 7 factors that we use to assess each job to make an ultimate determination of what the ultimate role will be and the grade will be for that particular position. And this just shows you some examples of the kinds of things that we would look at as criteria within those 7 factors. So we look at expertise. Do you have expertise within your own job, or do you have expertise that essentially is used outside of your job? Your interpersonal skills, are you doing negotiations, or are you simply just providing good customer service and interacting with people one-on-one? So this just gives you a little bit of scope information. Now this lovely diagram is called a grade map, and I want to spend a little time talking to you about it because I think this is the, number one, this is the document I think that really explains all in one piece of paper exactly how we put the compensation system together. So here you have your career path here and your individual contributor career path, and then you have your various roles. The jobs that are in the job group we're talking about today are office administration and support. And within that, you see that it has from 3 to 8. Those are the grades that are associated with this job group. You also see that there are overlaps between the various levels as they go up in various grades. And that is to accommodate the fact that there are situations where even though the person is in a management career track, their salary for purposes of this study in a grade 8 would be equivalent to an entry-level professional, as you see here, or an office administration and support person here. And so within grade 8, you have 3 different types of jobs, but they're all being compensated at the same level based on the evaluation of those 7 factors that I mentioned earlier. And that's how this particular methodology really serves us because we have so many diverse types of positions at the University of Missouri. So that's how we do the job evaluation. Now the next question to ask is how do we determine how to pay based on that job evaluation? So the first thing we do is we do the internal hierarchy as we've been talking about earlier. And then the next thing we do is we take some jobs that we have at the University of Missouri and we compare them to jobs that are found in the external market. And then we make a comparison of those jobs and we use that data to actually create the salary structure that we use to compensate. And so let me review that with you now. The 2 objectives in doing any kind of pay system are internal equity and external competitiveness. How do we make sure that happens? So our job evaluation tool allows us to determine internal equity. It gives us the internal hierarchy. So we know that this one job is at a higher level than another. That's how we use the hierarchy for that purpose. And now when we go out to the market and benchmark jobs, that will give us the information that we need to determine how we should pay relative to the external market. It will give us that information. Unfortunately, all of the jobs at the University of Missouri are not able to be benchmarked in the external market. But that doesn't matter, because as long as we know the hierarchy, we'll be able to determine where that job can be paid, even if we can't benchmark it to the external market. So we know if it's an 8, it needs to be paid with the other 8s, even if we don't have absolute information on how that particular title is paid in the market. We can extrapolate from that information. So what is a benchmark job? A representative job easily identified and common to many organizations. So an accountant. We may not have we have a fiscal analyst, but we may not have a manager of business and fiscal operations. That's a particular title that the university created, one of the many that we've created in this classification system. But we will know where to pay that particular job if we know its hierarchy, even if we don't have an actual benchmark job. And then we use salary survey information to give us the value of those benchmark jobs. And those are professional organizations who are in the business of providing us salary information. And we use information based on the recruitment market that we actually use to recruit for those jobs. We use higher education information. We also use industry information in those jobs that are more likely to be found in private sector, in the private sector. All right, so then once we have that information, what do we do? This slide kind of tells us how we put together the salary structure. So we consider all the jobs in the same pay range, in the same global grade, equal. And then we use the information that we got from the benchmark to essentially create a midpoint. And then we build a range around that midpoint that allows us to determine where we should be paying within that minimum and that maximum. We typically look at a midpoint as where people should be paid. If they've worked for about 5 to 7 years for an organization, they should be in the midpoint of their range. One of the reasons we knew that we had a problem here at the University of Missouri is that 80% of our staff salaries were paid within the first quartile, not close to the midpoint, the first 25% of their range, which essentially allows us to see that we really had ranges that were essentially not functioning in the way that they needed to be. So what was happening, and I don't have to tell you this, is that an employee would get reclassified to another title, and then they would go to the bottom of the range for that title, and they would stay there, sometimes for perpetuity, but they would figure out, all right, I think I want to get more money, so let me see if I can do one of two things. If I can job jump to another job, I might be able to get a few more cents on the dollar, and I'm still going to be put in my new range at the bottom of that range, but I might be able to advance that way. Or I could go to my boss and ask for a reclassification and see if I can get reclassed to another title. And when you got reclassed, you were still put in that first quartile, and that's where you stayed. So that was the pattern that we were experiencing with our compensation for staff. And what that does is it essentially always puts everybody at the bottom of their range. And you might say, well, what's bad with that as long as my ranges are going up? I don't care if I'm at the bottom. Well, part of the problem is that we need to be able to move that structure in accordance to what's happening in the external market. And so if everybody is at the bottom, every time we move the structure, everyone will fall out. And we spend all of our money doing structure adjustments to get people in the structure. We really want to spend more of our compensation dollar on paying for performance. And what we've done here is try to create big, wide ranges that will give managers and supervisors, deans and directors, a lot of opportunity to pay within the range. So let me talk a little bit about that. So the pay range midpoints are exactly the information we collected from our benchmark jobs to be the midpoints of those range. We collect the benchmark information and we use that to be the midpoints of our range. And this slide just talks about the market ratio, the comparison of the midpoint and the market information to show you that we're pretty much spot on in terms of how we've created our ranges. Once again, the job evaluation determines the internal relationships between jobs, and the pay range midpoints approximate the market for building the pay structure. We have 17 ranges, and these are ranges not just for this job group, this is for everybody, not compared, this is for all jobs. You'll see that they start with a range spread fairly narrow and continue to get farther and farther and wider apart as the ranges go higher, and that's to accommodate some of the diversity in terms of the kinds of jobs that are found within a particular grade or salary range. So, for example, you saw, remember grade 8 where we had a supervisor and a professional and one of the office administration and support all in the same grade. Well, you may have different kinds of market issues within that grade. As long as you're paying within that large, wide range, you'll still be paying equitably because the job evaluation system has made sure of that in the way that it's evaluated the jobs. As I mentioned earlier, it's a single structure for all campuses, and we have 2 very large executive broadbands for the very, very top of the organization. So this is what the ranges look like from range 1 to 8. It just gives you a kind of a sense of the midpoint, the maximum, and the minimums, both hourly and annual rates. But this will probably be more illustrative to kind of take a look at the range spread and how the range spreads get larger and larger and larger as the salary rates get bigger and bigger and bigger for the reasons that I just mentioned. So what happens to pay? Once we put all of the people into the new pay structure, we had many people who fell below the minimum of the new salary ranges. And as a result of that, the campus picked up the cost of providing salary to bring those people to the new minimums effective the pay period of February 17th. If you are in an auxiliary unit, then your department picked up that cost, and I'm sure they were delighted to do so. Employees paid above the new maximum in the future will probably have some limitation on how they will be paid. So if you're paid above the maximum of these new ranges, either one or 2 things could happen, and we haven't decided yet. We're still talking about what to do with that. Either your percentage increase will be limited, or your percentage increase will be, or you won't have a percentage increase, you'll have a lump sum increase that will not be base building. And so we're trying to debate between those 2 issues in terms of determining what would be the thing that we'd like to do. Part of the issue is we just have so many other things on our plates right now to kind of take a look at how many employees do we have that are actually above their maximum pay rate. So there are a few, so we have to think about what's the right thing to do for them. I just want to share with you kind of the results of our work. So before we started this structure, we had 19 pay ranges only for office administration and support. This isn't for IT. This is just for those things in the OT range. If any of you are familiar with the OT ranges, we had 19 of them. So that suggested that we had 19 distinct pay levels for the people in this job group. We've reduced that to 6. And this is the largest level, the largest group of ranges that we have. Most of the job groups that we are studying end up with 4 or 5 levels. But because of the types of jobs we have in this job group, we ended up having 6. But you can see where I suggest to you that our system of having 19 distinct pay ranges is really probably not, it's not equitable, because how can you really have that many different levels of pay? Because what you're suggesting is that you have a hierarchy of 19 different levels within that job group. We think 6 is probably a very equitable way to pay. Doesn't mean we only have 6 titles, but it certainly means that we have 6 pay ranges to encompass all of those titles. So that just gives you an illustration of some of the work that we had to do. So let's now talk about title consolidation. So one of the other areas we discovered when we started to do this work is that we had a proliferation of titles. Some of them did not have a lot of meaning, and sometimes the titles had meaning, but the actual duties had gotten kind of commingled with other titles. So what we did is we looked at all the titles that graded out the same, and we only consolidated those that came out in the same range when we did the job evaluation. So we didn't take a 6 and try to combine it with the job that was in an 8, for example. We looked at all the 7s, we looked at all the 6s, we looked at all the grade 8s, and we said, do we have any commonalities or similarities here where we could possibly consolidate? And this consolidation is kind of part of a of a system-wide, what they call global title hierarchy. So the way we consolidated our titles is consistent with what the other campuses are doing, though our titles are less consolidated than the other campuses, and partly it's because of our size and complexity. We assigned our titles at the MU level, and we created new job descriptions, and all of those new job descriptions are out on our website. I'll give you the information for that at the conclusion of the slide presentation. So this just shows you some of the old titles and how they evaluated, just to kind of give you a sense of the hierarchy of jobs that we were looking at, where we looked at jobs that came out in the same grade. This gives you an illustration of that. And this shows you what happened in terms of how we collapsed jobs. So where jobs we evaluated, where they came out in the same grade for the job evaluation, we collapsed them. And then some of the jobs that we collapsed, we did it simply because we were trying to have more modern titles. The senior secretary and senior receptionist probably doesn't really reflect the work of an office support person in the 21st century. And we really wanted to have names that we thought were more descriptive of the work that people are doing today. Editorial assistant, we moved that, we combined those two. We kept the title administrative assistant because we had so many people who were already in that title. And so what we did is we collapsed other titles into that title, so we wouldn't have to have so many people experiencing a title change. The executive staff assistant 1 and 2, we've got lots of people who had questions about what we did with those two titles. They evaluated out both of them at the 8. The 8 is the highest level within this new job hierarchy that we've established. And so we were left with a very ethical dilemma. If we created an artificial level where there wasn't one, we would have a problem with the people who were at the 1 who really should be at the 8. And so we evaluated the jobs. The jobs are evaluated independently. And so we looked at the jobs, they came out the same. And so what that probably says is the clear distinctions that used to be characteristic of those two titles have muddied a bit over time. And when we looked at the actual job descriptions and some of the actual requisitions for the jobs, there was lots of evidence of that. But I know that there's some people who emailed me personally to have conversations with us about that. So we understand that there was some concern about that. So where are we now? We're communicating the study results. All of you should have gotten an email from me essentially telling you whether or not your title changed, whether or not it didn't change, whether or not your title changed and you got a salary increase, or any combination thereof. We've identified the employees who are below the minimum of the new structure, and we're providing education and information to fiscal officers and managers and supervisors. And we'll be moving those titles. We will do it all from our office, so your fiscal officers will not have to process documents to make this happen. Our lovely staff in payroll will be delighted to do this for you. We've got new job descriptions for you out on the web. And of course, we understand that there might be situations where we will have the need to go back and take a second look at your particular title and your particular situation. If that's the case, please work with your supervisor. We would be glad to take a second look at any time you're trying to do something that affects 1,500 people. You're bound to have situations where you may not have looked at things thoroughly and you want to reassess. So do not hesitate to have that conversation with the appropriate person in your organization and ask us to take a second look at that. We're looking at updating our compensation policies and kind of making some new guidelines about how to pay and what to do with people who are over the range and under the range. And we're starting to try to communicate a new compensation philosophy which says we want you to pay into the range as opposed to trying to reclass people as a pay strategy. We want people to pay into the range. So we'll have some guidelines about what to do with mid-year increases, how to handle performance information, what to do with your top performers. We'll try to come up with real creative ways to kind of help you reward the people that need to be rewarded in your organization. That's our intent. So let me finish with just some frequently asked questions. Some of these questions might be the questions you have, and when we're done with that, we'll certainly have an opportunity to have questions and answers. So, will your pay be affected by the study? No one's pay will be decreased, but there will be employees, as I mentioned earlier, who will get a structure adjustment, is what we're calling it, as a result of the study results. Will my performance be affected? No. What we like to say is that this staff job title and salary study is about the work and not the worker. We really did not look at individual employees as part of the study. Will this affect my ability to advance in my career? I think what we think is that the career path will be clearer, and when you move from one grade to the next, it will be a fairly substantial promotion. So when you go from a 6 to a 7 to an 8, those are big jumps, both this way and also vertically. So we think it makes it more legitimate as opposed to having 19 ranges that you go up that didn't have much range spread. As I mentioned earlier, that's one of the reasons we designed the study in this way. Why are we conducting this study under current budget constraints? That's a good question. Mostly because we haven't done that since 1972. And so that's a very long time for any organization not to do a compensation study. I really believe that they were worried that maybe the cost would be so prohibitive that we shouldn't look at something that we couldn't then ultimately find the resources to fund. And I think now that we started the study, we're feeling a little bit more confident that yes, we'll be able to fund the increases that we need to put people in the structure properly. Will your title change? Yes, we had to do title consolidations. I put this slide up here just to let you know that we had gotten ourselves into kind of title craziness. We had 1,600 distinct job titles for 7,500 people. That's more than any multinational corporation in the United States, and several of them combined. So we were just adding classifications, tons of single incumbent classifications, to the point that they really had kind of lost their meaning. And so hopefully the title consolidation that we've done in this situation will allow us to have clear distinctions between one job and another. So again, when we found similarities within that same grade, we used that as the criteria to help us make some decisions about how to combine. Now, that doesn't preclude you from using working titles, and there are certain of you, because of the nature of your job, have working titles, as long as they're not titles that we use for some other purpose. You can't say that you're the Associate Vice Chancellor for HR, unless you'd like to do that, of course. But you can, if you have a particular program and that you're identified with that program and you need to put that on your business card or you want that to be an Outlook, we're really not spending a whole lot of time policing what's in the working title portion of PeopleSoft. So we get this question a lot because people will say, I think my job has changed, and so the job that you reviewed is not my job. And so we ask that people take a look at two criteria. If your job increases in terms of its scope, that's one thing. If your job increases in terms of its authority, its breadth, this way, that's another thing. So what I have found, particularly for people in this job group, is that as technology has come on board, what we've been doing is and budget cuts. So it's a combination of technology and budget cuts. People functioning in these particular roles get jobs that get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. That may or may not result in a job that's more complex. And so if you're one of the people who are in a job that you think has morphed over time, what we really need to do is just take a fresh look at that job to see if you're in the right title. It's hard to know. The other job families will be evaluated and within 2013, and we hope to have everything implemented by the end of 2014. So, some key points to remember: titles were consolidated, titles were evaluated, new salary ranges were developed, employees did not lose pay, job duties did not change, organizational structure did not change, no layoffs, no positions eliminated. That's really not the objective of what we were trying to do, and employee performance was not assessed as a part of this study. I just wanted you to know that in addition to the staff and human resources that evaluated the jobs, we also had a focus group work team that we used to kind of bounce ideas, to help us take a look at job descriptions, and just to be subject matter experts. And so we pulled from various people throughout the organization to help us do that. And every time we do a job group, we usually will have a working team that will work with us. As I mentioned earlier, we have a fairly robust website with information. All the job information is there, the job descriptions are there, the new pay ranges You can go look up your old title and see how it migrated. You can see what other titles were consolidated into your new title. All of that information is there. These slides are already also out there, as well as the taped portion of this presentation will be there after today, of course. So please feel free to avail yourself of all the information out there. And also, we have a dedicated email for this study that you can send us email information, and we have a group of people in our study team that are poised and ready to answer your questions on an individual basis. And they've been doing that. So I think that's all.